Testing 1 2. 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 Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the GTR show. New digs. So, first of all, great to see you. Second of all, we're going to get a chance to talk about one of my favorite subjects, buying and selling gear. So, in any case, want to say, first of all, say hello in the chat. Let us know where you're coming from. Let us know what the latest piece of gear you bought is, what the last piece of gear you sold was, and what the newest piece of gear you're looking at buying might be. So much to say about this whole gear thing. And, you know, whether you're just starting out, whether you're kind of an intermediate player, whether you're an advanced player, it's a constant learning process. And so the goal of this show is to really kind of offer some tips about how you can make the most of the buying and selling process. First of all, buying and selling gear is one of the most exciting things ever because it's kind of like Christmas every day of the year. And that said, the anticipation can get us into a little bit of trouble. So what I want to do is walk us through a couple of different things. And this, in many ways, you're going to find that this continuum is going to be something that you just live from over the course of your gear buying career. There are three main types of gear buyers out there. The emotional purchase. When we buy based on emotion, gotta have it now. And I'm going to subdivide that into, I got excited about something so much to the point like I have to have it now. That can be a used piece of gear. That can be a new piece of gear. Then there is the kind of like, I've got to go out and do this gig. I need this piece of gear and I need it yesterday. Both are emotion-driven types of purchases, but they're on opposite ends of the spectrum. The gear purchase for the gig usually is accompanied by a little bit more common sense because you know exactly what it is that you need to do that exact thing. The other end of the spectrum of the emotional gear purchases was like, I've just got to have it. And what it means is that you will potentially make poor decisions because they're driven by emotion. You'll make them faster than you would if you weren't buying out of emotion, and the chances of getting burned are worse. Now, the interesting thing is that I will be a little first person because I've been buying a bunch of gear. There was a piece of property that my dad had. We sold it at the end of the year last year. There was an increase in value. The federal and state government would like to take as much of that as possible as a professional musician. I have the benefit, since this is my work, to be able to leverage my purchases against my income. And so at the end of last year, I bought a bunch of stuff knowing that when the tax man cometh, which he does every year, or they do every year, they wanted to claim and pull back as much as they could. So I wanted to make sure that I did everything that I could within reason to make a bunch of smart gear purchases for things that I knew I was going to use for very specific purposes. So I actually ended up in both ends of the spectrum. They were largely pieces of gear that I knew I was going to use for gear demos. But they were also purchases that I had some emotion around. So the danger is that emotional purchase sometimes can cause you to make poor decisions, and one of which I will unpack in a little bit. So again, there are these different types of buyers. There's the emotional buyer. There is the like, I'm interested in this thing. I've been thinking about it for a while. I think I'm going to go there. And then there is the scientist. I've done all the research. I've looked at all the comps. I've gone to all the places. This is what I'm going to pay. This is what I'm willing to pay just above that. And if none of that stuff happens, I'm not buying. That person very, very, very rarely gets burned. And I came about this close, if it weren't for some buyer protection, to getting burned. So we will unpack that. Now, that gets us to where do we look for gear? Because we're in a strange time right now. The interesting thing is that my first bad, and one of the things about this particular stream is that I decided that I'm going to actually go first person and share some real stories and actually naming the guilty and the innocent. My first bad gear buying experience was at Guitar Center. And my dad, when he was alive, we went into Guitar Center on Van Ness. I still remember the phone number, 44, fill in the blank, 4020. And that's so amazing because that phone number has been gone for decades. I guess that tells you about my mindset about buying gear. Do you remember the name of the phone number or the number of the phone number of the place you used to buy gear at if you were a tot decades ago? And if not, in any case, 1-800-221-6468. I think that's Sweetwater's number. The numbers continue. In any case, we went in. I had my heart set on an SG. I really, really wanted an SG. The guy gives us a price, and he disappears into the back. Says, all right, I just have to have my manager approve the deal. Comes back out and says, oh, the manager wouldn't approve the deal. And my dad blew a gasket. He gave this guy a good talking to, and we promptly left. Now, the interesting thing is that, part of why my dad was so upset was one, is it was a total swindle. Because those guys back in those days weren't back in the back, up to all sorts of no good, and it was just kind of a hustle. That's how Guitar Center did business then. Sorry, truth. So my dad was like, I'm having none of this, and you're not getting any of my money. And I'm like, and I had this thing in my hands. I was already at home, disturbing the neighbors at all hours with this thing. And so that was one of the reasons my dad was so upset. And it's also a terrible example to set of what business, quote unquote, in the music business is like. For some little, I don't know, it was like 12 or 13 years old. So they pried the guitar out of my hands and off we went. I ended up buying a Gibson L6 Deluxe, terrible guitar, at a place across town that Guitar Center had basically made it so they couldn't get the SGs. That's just how the business worked back in those days. But that was actually Don Weir's Music City for those of us 673. I want to say 9121, but I don't think that's it. In any case, that was a place where the Journey guys used to go and shop, and it was a great place, and they treated you great, and it was a lovely place. And in any case, okay, no, actually, we'll go there for a second because this is the great thing about a local retailer. The big box store basically couldn't care less and was actually trying to rip us off. The local retailer who was in competition with the big box store actually was the place where you could go to get treated with respect. Guitar Center in some ways has changed a lot, but if you take a look at the fact that they're basically upside down, it had been upside down for a long time, their chickens have hatched. The sad part is there are a lot of great people who started that organization and have been in that organization, most of whom are not part of the organization anymore, that somehow it just, it's one of the things about a big box store. In any case, I ended up with a guitar that I wasn't as happy with, but that's how it goes. The point being is that even as an early guitar buyer, my emotions play a part in it because I think about the music I'm going to make with it. So that is to say, it's almost impossible to go into this situation without having some emotion involved in it. I would mentally make a note, are your emotions driving you on a scale of 1, just a little bit, to 10, like I'm all the way in, or maybe 11, I have to have it. Where do they drive you in your purchase process? And just be mindful of that because there are situations that you can get yourself into where you're going to find yourself getting a little burned. All right, so that said, as I went into the season of buying gear, that includes video gear, that includes, but for the focus of this thing, we're going to talk about guitar gear. Um, as I went into this, I knew there were specific things that I wanted to get. And I also knew that because it was at the end of the business year, I should say at the end of the calendar year, and I had a window in which I can have some time to work in, that also there also was kind of a glut of some gear on the market. So I got a chance to kind of pick through and choose what it was that I wanted, zero in on the exact pieces of gear that I wanted. And one of the great things about today, and this is kind of why I was talking about the local store, because I absolutely want to give them some love. There is nothing like being able to go into the store and going, I like the shape of this neck. I'm willing to pay a little bit more to support a local retailer when I have the opportunity that fits right. Um, and one of the most important things, and I'm going to talk about a guitar that I bought, is that it's not until you actually have the guitar neck in your hand that you kind of go, or you go, there it is. And there are certain things you just can't find out online. All right. Now, in terms of where to do your surveying, pretty straightforward. If it's a new piece of gear, the first thing I do is I hightail over to Sweetwater. I will go over and look if it's relatively new, but not brand spanking new. I'll look at the number of stars. I will parse the reviews by the most negative reviews. You might have heard me say that before. I want to know what the haters and the folks who, usually you'll find that in the 1-star reviews, there's a disproportionate number of the people that just kind of will hate any piece of gear that they like, or they buy rather, and they just want to say something negative. But there's almost always a bunch of truth in what they're saying. And so whether it's said in a spirit of negativity and they just really want to lift up their leg and, I'm always going, okay, let me sift this for what truth there is. It made this noise, it did this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at those negative reviews and I'm going to look at the date range. Because quite often over a production date range, there will be a period of time, especially when stuff is manufactured, I'm just going to go there, in China, where somebody was buying bad parts because they could get them cheap. I'm just going to be totally straightforward. If you have the opportunity to buy a guitar that's made in Indonesia or a guitar that's made in China, buy the one that's made in Indonesia. It's a different culture. The idea about how they, quote unquote, generally do gear manufacturing business for a company like Fender, it's a different mentality in those two countries. The Indonesians work for every penny they make. The Indonesian gear is awesome. I have actually never played an Indonesian instrument that I wasn't like, wow, the craftsmanship on this is amazing. They do great work. So if you're at a Squire price point, and there's no shame in that, buy Indonesian. The Squire stuff that's made in China is not nearly as good as the Indonesian stuff. There is a reflection in price point, but the great thing about Squire is compared relatively to Fender, their price point, their most expensive Squire is a very affordable instrument, especially if it's bought in Indonesia. Super, super high quality, made by people that really care about you having a quality experience. It's a different mentality in China. It's a profit-driven, how much can we make and how little can we spend to get it out the door. Just a different mentality, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's the difference between, I don't know, Burger King and In-N-Out. If I'd much rather eat it in In-N-Out because the people that are there serving me really care about my having a great experience. Burger King is like, yeah, here's another burger. I digress to food. I must be hungry. Now, Sweetwater is great because it allows you to look at the number of stars, and again, parsing by the negative experience, you can zero in on a date range. Again, sometimes that's going to tell you about a manufacturing problem, a bad part, a bad sourcing of parts, but usually you'll see this little blip when there's kind of something super negative happening, and then that blip ends. So then you can kind of go, well, I've seen this really series of positive results afterwards. That's why then you unflip that and you start looking at the positive reviews, and you look at the date range and see how and where they do or they don't overlap. When buying a new piece of gear, that's a huge way of doing that. Obviously, we're now in this quote-unquote post-NAMM phase now. The new NAMM gear, that's why there are gear demonstrators out there. Moving right along. Actually, no, I'm gonna hang up my hat on that for a second. So what do you do about some new piece of gear that's just come out? The great news is that there are enough content creators that are out there that you can kind of begin to go through and watch what they're doing. The unfortunate part of being a content creator is quite often the manufacturers have a direct relationship and they're sending you gear. It's very, very hard to go, the frets buzz, it wasn't milled properly along the side of the neck, it cut my hand, the pickups are really noisy, it wasn't set up well. The unfortunate part is many of the folks that are in the part of business that I'm in, at times you can't really just claw back and say, this doesn't cut it. What that happens in my world is when I have an instrument, and I've had enough over this past year where I was just like, I can't review this. And I let the manufacturer know why. But, and generally you kind of go, what aren't they reviewing? That also kind of gives you a little bit of insight to that. All right. That's the new gear side of things. And then, of course, there's Mitch from Sweetwater. Mitch Gallagher is like the greatest demo person in the world because he gives you more detail, more succinctly, more intelligently than anybody in the business. Okay, the used side of things. Reverb is my first stop. And there are a number of things about Reverb that are super valuable that I think you, as an end user, either know about or want to know about. Generally, there's a landing page, and on that landing page, there's a chart that shows you, kind of like if you look at the Klons, what the trajectory of that piece of gear has been. And it also has specific dots on a timeline letting you know when it hit those specific points. And then there'll be a chart off to the side of that, just labeling, what those specific purchases were and the condition of the piece of gear that's sold. Now, the thing that's happening right now, and I'll use a specific case in point, is the Klon thing has gone completely off the rails. But when you actually go and take a look at how many people are purchasing $5,000 Klons, and you begin to look at that trajectory, you then begin to kind of go, what is the law of supply and demand actually really telling you? If there's this many people buying them for $5,000, in theory, it's going to go down. Let's see if it goes up to $7,500 in 6 months. Let's revisit this, and we'll revisit this topic next year, 12 months from now. My guess is, if I were to guess, and I will hang my hat on that and say that I'm potentially wrong, is it going to go down to $3,500? And if you spent an extra $1,500 on a Klon that 6 months later is $3,500, think about all the other gear that you could have bought for that $1,500. That's why I did not end up buying a $5,000 Klon. And I may end up regretting it, but so be it. I'd rather have to potentially spend at some point, if I lost my mind, $7,500 on a Klon than having spent $5,000 and lost $1,500 because I made a really stupid emotional purchase. We'll see how that goes. All right, so as you're inside that kind of grid there, again, the chart, and then specific pieces of gear with specific conditions, you're able to make a really educated range of brackets through which you actually buy, if you will. Those are the lenses through which you're able to make that purchase. And in so doing, it means that when you go out and look at the individual listings, you begin to quantify things. Now, there were a couple of things that have happened over the process of buying a 1964 AC30, a Univibe, and downstairs a Pinstripe Marshall 412 cabinet that I learned. The majority of my purchases were done on Reverb. One, you get a chance to see the history and kind of the rating of the seller. Two, you have the ability to quantify those listings against other listings that are on there. And three, you can then begin to go through and look at the variations of the different things and do an education process. And that is super, super important. That educational process enables you to kind of study some of the things that you're going to, quote unquote, need to know. Now, this gets us to this emotional purchase person in this next phase of the process where you've zeroed in on what it is that you're going to potentially purchase. The emotional buyer is so excited about pushing the buy button. And I made that mistake in one of the transactions that I had because there's an amp that I am going to be buying that I got emotional about buying. And we're going to come back to that in a minute when we talk about eBay. So the thing is that as I was researching these AC30s, I was born in '64. I'm kind of enamored about that. Also, 1964 AC30 is a classic amplifier. So ultimately, I kind of already went into it knowing I want one that's got the top boost, and that was something that you could add, kind of like Mesa Boo. You can add stuff after the fact, either at the factory or just add one on. This is a post-factory top boost. Then I kind of looked at the price points. The amp that I purchased was listed for $37.50. And just on a whim, because it was at the end of the year, and I know a lot of people are like, if I can sell it, I can sell it. I don't beat people up. I was like, I don't know. I'll offer him $3,000. Sold. I was like, I really was like, well, I really would have given you $32.50. They didn't even counter. They were just like, sold. I was like, okay. And they shipped it. All the tubes were taken out. They sent a tube map, all of that. Now, a couple of things. Oh, hang on. Let me scoot up here. I've got them up top here. Now, sorry for disappearing out of frame for a minute. So there were photos, and this is an important learning point, of every part of the amplifier, but the top of the amplifier, the whole thing looking down. And when the thing arrived, it was missing these little, I didn't even know what these were called. These are basically called vent covers. And it was missing the vent covers. You're looking at $90 of original AC30 60s vent covers that I had to go out and buy. And what it was is that, you know, I'm not going to say the seller purposely shystered me, but given the fact that nowhere it showed the top of the amplifier, I'm like, so there were cheaper ones that actually didn't fit. I had to go out and do another day or two's worth of research, finding the right vent covers that would actually fit on the top of the amplifier. The great news is these are era appropriate, so if you're going to have to do something like that, it's important to do it. Probably in retrospect, and I'm telling you this because now I know I want to see every single angle of the amplifier so I know what it's like. Ideally, with something like a vintage amplifier, you want to see the inside. You want to begin to recognize what the era-appropriate transformer is. You want to know what the era-appropriate speakers are. Those are Vox Silver Bells, and they are awesome. They are probably original to that amplifier, but maybe not. I didn't really care because I've never had a pair of original Silver Bells, and those are great. Also, then in the process of this, I learned that there was basically a treble and a normal and a bass version of the AC30. And I learned about kind of what the differences between them. That ended up being a bass one. And, you know, of course, anybody selling this is the preferred one. I'm just like, yeah, let me go out and do some research. And the great thing is that I knew enough going into it. And again, I didn't become an instant expert. And this is the thing about being an emotional purchaser. On this one, I wasn't super emotional. I would say on a 3 to 4 on a scale of 10. But I was emotional about it because I'm like, I've romanticized the idea of this amplifier. And again, this is analogous to any piece of gear that you would be looking for. I knew I wanted it. I knew I was going to buy it. I knew I was going to buy the right one. So the thing is there's a guy here in the San Francisco Bay Area that is the best amp guy in the world, in my opinion, and Joe Satriani's and Kirk Hammett's, and he's the guy that works on everybody's stuff. So this is going to be taking a visit there. I know there's probably $500 worth of work. As I unpacked the back panel to fit the tubes in, the actual chassis kind of is sitting a little far forward in the cabinet, and the way the back panel was attached to the chassis, which is how it fits on the AC30, as soon as I disconnected the screws, kind of it went forward. So there's probably a little bit of cabinet work in there. So there's a reason I think they were willing to just kind of $3,000. I think it's going to probably have to be pulled out of there. Whatever mounting system, because you can't really see there's a wood panel at the bottom of it, is going to probably have to be maybe doweled or just re-drilled or whatever. And you know, these are old amps. They get dropped. There's stuff that happens. But most importantly, I plugged into this amplifier. Brilliant channel, set the top boost, and every different guitar I put into, you leave it at one setting on the amplifier, you change guitars, and it just takes the character of the guitar, and it's just brilliant. It's that good. So the good news is at the end of the day, I'll have my amp guy work on it. He'll just perfect anything that needs to be perfected. Worth every penny that I spent. That's the vintage side of things. I also, my buddy Mason, so now we'll go to the more modern used side of things. Um, my buddy Mason loaned me his ES335, Mason from Vertex Effects, for some demo stuff. And I've never had a 335, and I was like, I discovered my, like, if I, as a demo person, one of my favorite imitations is my John Mayer musings. Well, I got the 335, and this whole other part of my pseudo John Mayer came out. I'm like, oh, I've got to have one of these. Totally emotional, but again, it's driven by the fact that there's a professional outlet for this, and one that's going to be important. So I was just like, I had no idea. I literally discovered a whole other side of my playing, and I'll be posting a like a micro demo from one of the Celestine demos this week, and it's just kind of like that guy came out, but I didn't know that guy was in there, and if it weren't for Mason and the demos and that stuff, I would have never discovered that. So the point being is, I was like, I need to buy another one of these because Mason clawed his guitar back. So I looked at Craigslist and I spent a good 48 hours, and this is really the stupidity of saying I spent 48 hours researching, but basically I knew that guitar was going, so I was like, okay, I need to replace this because I've got demo work I need to do. And I went out on a reverb. I looked at all the different ones. Mason's is this beautiful red. It looks like basically the cream guitar. And so I kind of got that in my head. And this is one of the classic things about buying a guitar because of the way it looks. You're guaranteed to make, I don't know, 40% worse intelligent decision because you're buying purely on color, not based on all the other things that ultimately merit the quality of an instrument. But I totally get it. I wanted a red one. I look on Craigslist. There's a guitar that was $1,900. I'm just revealing the prices because I want to be honest with you. It was $600 less than the same guitar everywhere on Reverb. Now I'm like, I'm either about to potentially get a great deal or I'm about to get ripped off. So I went in and looked at all the comps. I knew which Gibson I was looking for. The 2019s, I went to the NAMM show that year and went up to the Gibson booth and played all the new guitars, and they were like, in particular the ESs, I was like, these guitars are great. So I knew that the 2019 was an instrument that I had personal experience, note to you, personal experience, whether it's local store, wherever it is, buying something that you've actually sat down and played means that you have actually sat down and played it. So it meant I knew what I was stepping into. But especially when it comes to a guitar like that, there's a bazillion Gibsons floating around, that is to say Chinese Gibsons. And so I was like, $600 less than everywhere else. And the seller was like, can we meet? When are we meeting? I'm like, okay. Like all the red lights that could go off and the alarms. I'm like, okay. I reached out to at Warsham Musician, my publisher there. Bruce Adolph has a guitar show. He has 2 guitar shows, 3 guitar shows. The Seattle Tacoma Guitar Show, the Rose Guitar Festival in Portland, and then the other one whose name I'm forgetting. So I reached out to him. He in turn reached out to Joe Riggio, who's a master builder, knows these guitars in and out. Riggio guitars are phenomenal, and Joe is an amazing guy and a great guitar player. And he sent the Craigslist listing on to Joe because Joe can spot a fake like that. So as opposed to my going into this like an imbecile, potentially buying a knockoff, Joe can look at this and looked at the listing and went, it's legit. It's a good price. So literally that text is coming in as I'm driving on my way to meet this guy. But I probably wouldn't have spent the money had I not gotten that affirmation that like you're not about to get ripped off. Now, this is the next thing for you, the guitar buyer. And this is kind of one of the things, let's say, for example, you do buy an instrument. Back up a step. 2019 is almost a new guitar. So let's fold that into the new guitar. So let's say, for example, you get a new guitar from Sweetwater. There are 2 sides of that equation, the cool side and the not cool side. I purchased this guitar, but I might just send it back. That's kind of not cool to do. Yes, they have a refund thing, but it's not supposed to be like walking into a music store, pulling one down off the shelf and putting it back, and just trying the next one. It's not a play to decide if you like it and then send it back. It's just so it's out there, not cool to do that. If you actually take the time to purchase something from somebody, do so with the purchase. The idea is I'm going to keep this thing. So just so that's said, because it needs to be said, and I've had conversations with the Sweetwater folks. It's like there are people that are habitual returners, and they take advantage of the system. And what they do is they take away from the quality of the experience of people that are actually legitimate buyers, and it's not cool. And it also turns this really positive thing that Sweetwater does and turns it into something negative. There's enough negativity in this world. We don't need more. Now, that said, if I get an instrument from Sweetwater, and or what I did with this particular instrument, the first thing I learned to do decades ago is you basically face it towards the light. From the bridge side, you look down the neck and you look for high spots and low spots. This neck was beautiful. No high frets. The neck was nice and straight. It was great. The next thing that I do, and it's interesting as I was doing this because I was thinking about you as I was doing this, like I go through all these tests that I instinctively do. I literally played every single fret on every single string. And I was thinking, I've never seen anybody do that, but I know there must be people out there that do that. But I literally went every single fret. If there's something wrong on a guitar, and I know this from review stuff, I'll find it in the first 5 minutes. It's just kind of one of those things. It's an intuitive thing. But literally, there was one spot where the one fret made a little tiny bit of noise, but it was so minute. I'll take it to Gary Brower, and he'll be like, it's fine. But the point being is then you test all the places that you would want to bend. Make sure there's nothing weird as you do your bends. I brought a little amp with me. It's kind of funny. It's this little kind of one of those clear cigarette pouch size things. But I just wanted to make sure the pickup selector was fine. The pickups worked fine. I knew I could change that. But acoustically, I wanted to make sure the instrument sounded good. The other thing is my thumb is not a super huge, long thumb. So when I play with the thumb over the top of the neck, there's certain types of riffs that I want to do. Playing on the third string, the flat 3, 4, flat 5, that if the neck is too big here or comes out too much like that, what I would call rather than a C shape, a D shape, if you will, rounder, less round, I can't keep the thumb around the top of the neck. This finger is a little too short to do it as well. So there's going to be something like that probably for your technique that, yep, certain guitars I can do this thing, certain guitars that I can't. It's not until the guitar is in your hand that you can actually make that decision. This neck is still a little rounder than I can really do that thing, but it filled so many of the other check boxes. I was like, I'm going to do this. Did a bill of sale, all of the things around that. But it was really interesting as I went through all of that, thinking about what is on your checklist. The first thing is just hitting the strings. If the guitar didn't sound good just with the open strings, all the effects and amps in the world, polishing a turd, you're still just polishing a turd. If the guitar, and there are vintage instruments that you can pay $20,000 for that you pick them up and it's like, this wasn't a good one. It wasn't a good one when it was new. It's still not a good one. It just doesn't get any better as it gets old. It just kind of gets older. Now that said, as people talk about old wood, it does develop a sound. But if a guitar didn't sound good when it was new, it's not going to mysteriously become a good sounding instrument when it's old. So just keep that in mind. Just because it's a certain year, certain vintage, it's actually one of the reasons, buying vintage gear, you want to be really conscious of that. So I have Melissa in the chat there most likely, and there are probably some questions, but unfortunately in this particular new setup here, I was not able to get everything all dialed. So what I may actually request is if the ever amazing Melissa, by the way, I've been in NAMM madness mode. I produced 2 videos for one for a tech track and the other for Washington Musician Chapel, and have been working on other video stuff as well. This is actually a set up for a video that I'm finishing for DPA Mic for Washington Musician. It's a review kind of going through more microphones than you could possibly ever imagine. By the way, if you've never tried a DPA mic, holy cow, they are amazing. In any case, this room, the amazing woodwork was actually done by Melissa, who I cannot say enough positive things about. She gets all 5 stars and a gold star. But so I really have been shooting in here, and I really wanted to be in here. But there were a couple of things that I wasn't able to get up and running that in future streams I will be. So the other thing is, and because we've talked enough about the tech side of things, I will be talking about some of the tech stuff that goes into building a room, but that's not the primary focus of today, because I really wanted to talk, especially kind of in the believe in music side of things. I really wanted to talk about that today, especially since I said last week we're going to be talking about gear. Now, and I meant to have it in frame here, but excuse me, I'm going to do the unthinkable and step out of frame. Now, in this room, there is when I set up a space, I try and set it up for multi-use. So there's basically a bar that fits onto the wall where I have white paper that comes down. This is where I shoot any instrument that I'm going to sell. One of the things that I do, besides having the Dunlop spray and rag, is that I will use the white glove underneath the strings to wipe the dust off. I'm gently going into the selling side because I just thought of it and I want to make sure I don't forget to cover that. But the idea is when you go to sell an instrument, the best and most effective way to sell stuff is to give it a nice clean. Clean the strings, clean underneath between the strings and the headstock, underneath the pick guard, because something happens, especially when you put stuff under good light. When you shoot it, like the dust just pops out. So that is to say, you want to make your listings as attractive as possible. Shoot them in good light, make sure the instrument is clean, and make sure you do everything you can to really make it look like, because I know you take great care of your gear, make it really apparent that you take great care of your gear. Again, is that amp being an example, when there's a missing angle, why isn't the top, like they showed the top panel, and they showed this, and they showed that, but there was never a shot of the entire top panel. Now I know. All right, back to the buying side of things. I've dreamed about owning an actual Univibe. This guy showed up yesterday. I'm going to be making a video, and I think there's no way I can do it in 5, so it's going to be 10, the 10 most iconic effects of all time. Ironically, when I got, when it was just going to be 5, which again, I can never fit it in 5, basically, I was like, Hendrix. I was like, holy cow, talk about an impact on somebody. So, hey, what do we have here?
Do you want to borrow my laptop?
I would love to borrow your laptop. Thank you, sweetheart. Tech support is coming through. Thank you very much. All right. So, thank you very much. Thank you very much. There we go. Excellent. Thank you, Melissa. Singing your praises as always. Awesome. Thank you so much. Oh, look at this. My love language. Okay, so first of all, 6-string Brian, hello. And by the way, in the form there, feel free to bring any questions that you got, and I will do my best to answer them as honestly as is possible. So first of all, hello. Once I get this place set up a little bit better, you can tell I keep looking over to the left. That's where the main computer is. There's going to be an extra monitor there that's going to hang on the stand. This is one of the multiple cameras that'll be up here. So it's going to be a much better experience. I should probably have not said any of that. But I was so excited to get up here and shoot. I was like, okay. And the slightly reddish tone, actually, that looks pretty good over there. All right. So let me answer the question. All right. So 6-string Brian. Is the Marshall JCM 2000 DSL a good all-round percussive amp? So I'm going to answer that honestly. And I say this hoping that nobody listening has the TSL or the DSL. I own the JCM 2000 TSL. I bought it when it was new. I went into the Guitar Center. I was like, this is the latest and greatest Marshall. It was the precursor of the JVM 410H, which is the best Marshall I've ever owned. If possible, you're looking at the JCM 2000 versus the JVM 410. Buy the JVM 410H, the 4 unique channels. It's an amazing amplifier. It's got MIDI. So the 4 channels each have 3 different modes. So you basically have 12 channels that you can control via MIDI. It's got 2 different effects loop, one that's series, parallel, the other is just series. I think you can associate the different effects loops with different channels. I always just use one effects loop, the series parallel one, and I would run that in parallel. And what I would do is I would put the perfect delay to use with that amplifier, in my opinion, is the Eventide time factor, because it's this nice. Actually, so just so you guys know, my early morning Saturday is watching RJ Ronquillo, because it's just like, it's nice to see somebody else stream who I have a lot of respect for. So he was talking about the different Eventide effects, and I was thinking back about this time factor. What's great about it is this nice big heavy thing that on the top of an amp on a bouncy stage doesn't go falling off the back. The other thing is it's got knobs, and so you could easily do that. So on that particular amp, the idea is you run the effects loop in parallel, and what that allows you to do is run the time factor totally wet, and then you just blend in how much time effect you want from the time factor, and then the direct signal is going along and the effect signal is going along, and then they marry. That is to say, they're in parallel, as opposed to running it into the time factor in series, where you're going from the amp preamp into the time factor and then out. The idea is that I found that there was, first of all, a little phasing that I did not like. Sounded terrible. I don't know whether that's the amp, which I think it probably is, something with the loop, but it meant that when the effects loop went into the delay, something just wasn't right with the direct signal. So the great thing about the parallel was like, problem solved. Direct signal sounded great. I could just blend in exactly as much delay or whatever effect you would want. So the unfortunate part, my dear friend, and I really hope you don't have that amp simply because of everything I just said. But the other thing is that I would suggest having an opportunity to check out a JVM 410, because it is an amazing amplifier. I will say the one flaw that I found, and this comes, excuse me, from sitting in at the Satriani guitar camps, is that at total concert volume, like what happens, and I remember Joe Satriani mentioning to me, sitting in, I think before he joined Deep Purple, I think he sat in with them, and he said, when you sit in with somebody, just be prepared to be, I think he said something to the effect of, be the loudest guy on a stage. Then he kind of went on to say, because with the Deep Purple thing, those guys play so loud, you have to be ready to actually to step up when it's time. That solo has to pop. And in my situation, when I'm jamming with people like Joe, I'm the least important fader on that console. Now the good news is the sound folks there, I usually get to know them, and I'm nice to people, so they actually like to kind of do me a solid, and I'm usually very apparent in the mix. Note to self, being a D-bag usually will you'll have fallout. If you're not nice to people, they remember it. When you're nice to people, they're kind of like, and I don't mean authentically so, but if you're just genuinely nice to everybody, then people genuinely will want to be nice back most of the time. So that said, in those situations, it's you can't imagine how loud those jam sessions are. And Joe, because the great thing about Joe is like, he's old school. It's like you turn the amp up. It's supposed to be loud. The drummer's not in some little cage, and to this day, Joe's still not using in-ears. He's like, I want to feel the room. I want to hear the room. I want to turn this thing up, and I want it to rock. And I love that. And there's nothing wrong with in-ears. Hey, what's going on, Lonnie? So the thing is that the experience of that. So what happens with the JVM at that concert volume is my JVM, the power amp starts to distort. And what it means is that I've learned this like 2 or 3 times. You have to back off where you normally set the preamp distortion. And because the great thing is power amp overdrive, it's not really distortion, it's overdrive, is one of the greatest sounds in the world. That's why they started building master volume amplifiers, to imitate that sound at lower volume. And then they kind of like, oh, let's take this all the way over into the distortion side of things. So when you're in a setting where it gets super, super loud and you're starting to get the power amp breaking up, that's where you want to back off on the preamp section. And I just found that the voicing on the JVM 410H was much, much, much better to my taste than the DSL. I'm sorry to rabbit trail there, but that's a case in point that's important to me. Um, what do I think about sorry, this is Lonnie. Hey, Lonnie. What do I think about the Z Glide Next from Dean Zelinsky? You know, the funny thing is that I have never owned one of the Dean manufactured necks when Dean was the owner of said manufacturer. So Dean Guitars is, of course, Dean Zelinsky. But Dean sold, and so, back in the day, you could see the Doobie Brothers and Dean ads, of course, Dimebag, and all sorts of folks, Michelangelo, hey. But that was actually my buddy Elliot, who's now passed away, who owned that company. And so I've never played one of Dean's necks, but he's one of the things about Dean is they made a double cut. They were probably one of the first people to make a double cut that looked like a vintage Les Paul special. I think it's a special, the double cut with the P90s. But he did beautiful finish. Obviously, Dime was playing the Dean guitars, but I'm 99.9% positive that those were post Dean Zelinsky instruments. Could be wrong. In any case, so he's a guy that grew up old school, knowing those 50s Les Pauls, knowing what it's like to build. He was actually one of the very first people to put DiMarzio pickups in his guitars, kind of quote unquote stock. So there's a lot of history. Unfortunately, my history with Dean's has not intersected. So you know what? That's a checkbox I need to check. So noted. All right. I'm going to dig into the chat here real quick, which is always a sign of trouble. Look at that. Chris, thank you so much. All right. Oh, my word. A couple of great things about the gear demo thing. So this is the interesting thing about the gear demo side is there's a huge responsibility to serve people ethically. And I'll warn you, I'm like a kid at a candy store. I pretty much, unless I didn't like cinnamon flavored and spicy hot candy, but I pretty was like, I like all candy, right? But I also find the things that I gravitate towards, and most of the time I find some way if there's something that I don't really dig. So I'm going to actually go in briefly and talk about. So okay. So let me just hang on. Let me back up here and let me make sure I've got. By the way, you can. Melissa is manning the chat there, and it's both. There is a form that is on YouTube, and there's a form that should also be on because she's so amazing on the Doug Doppler official Facebook, and this is also streaming on the Doug Doppler personal. So Melissa, if by chance, I've stolen your laptop. Oh, no, she's listening on her phone because she's so awesome. Actually, okay, so backing up a step, the idea of going out and finding an instrument like, the ES, just be aware that, especially when you see an excited seller, that's usually the kiss of death. They just want to get your money. And this guy was a restaurateur. We actually met in front of his restaurant. And I also did a little bit of a test on that, where I was like, okay, he said, oh, meet me, in front of this delicatessen. And he said, actually, I have this restaurant next door. I said, oh, can you get a pen? And so he disappears inside. And so I'm like, okay, he's legit, right? Because you just got to be smart. There are people out there, and this is the thing about making an excited, emotion-based decision, is that there are people that will prey on that. And it's just unfortunate. Hey, what's going on, Ben Tom? Great to see you, my man. Yes, Melissa, thank you for all your help. Okay, so the vintage gear. This kind of ties into the thing that I was saying about the ES335. That purchase in particular, I knew that the 24 to 48 hours period of deciding what model I could afford, and that I was going to buy the 2019. I played them at NAMM. I was like, these are legit. And they, like, the new Gibsons are the ones that I played, especially at the 2019 show. Those, like, every single one. And I realized they set them up for the show. But I was like, these guitars are legit. I'm going to buy this with confidence because I know this instrument. And I'm super, super happy with the guitar. It is not my favorite color. It's kind of a tobacco sunburst. But I ultimately was like, I'm not buying it for the color. I'm buying it because I need this instrument. and I need it to sound right, and it sounds great. And the other thing is, there's a certain feeling a guitar has when it's new, and it's a tightness. And I play that guitar, I'm like, this thing is unplayed. It's sat in a closet. I'm like, I'm going to be able to play my vibe into this guitar. And in the same way that I mentioned that you can't make a crappy guitar sound good over time. They're just going to still sound crappy. It was crappy when it was new. It doesn't mysteriously get better. One day you pull it out of the case, oh, I'm better now. It just doesn't happen. This guitar has got a tightness, and I'm like, it has a, I'd say a 7.5, maybe 8.5 out of 10. But my ability to play my tones into it, it'll go up another point because it will literally be responding to my vibrations. I can tell it's got a tightness to it that as I loosen it up around my pick attack, around the way I hit the strings, all of that stuff, it's going to literally resonate, quote unquote, to my frequency. And that guitar is going to be an 8.5 or a 9 by the time I'm done. Simply because I know what happens with the guitars. They just kind of take on the way you play when they're new like that. So I can tell that tightness, I'm going to be able to break that thing in, and it's going to be a great sounding guitar. And I'm super happy about it. And part of my gig as a gear demonstrator is to be able to coax whatever I need to out of an instrument. And most importantly, that guitar is going to be a very, very, very important instrument for me as a gear demonstrator. That is to say, the reason I bought it was not just to add another instrument to the collection. The reason I bought it is I'm going to use it for a very specific purpose. Okay, Tom Atkins, how are you, my friend? This is a great question. FR, speaker recommendation, leaning towards the Friedman. Okay. Oh boy, you're in my wheelhouse. Okay. A couple of things. One, Celestion just released a new, I think it's called a triple crown or triple cone. I should know that. I apologize. That just came out at NAMM. It is their second, what they call full range live response speaker. And so, and the reason I'm pretty sure it's the triple crown, but that's the same. No, it's going to be the triple cone. That's what it is. It's the triple cone. But it's the second speaker they've made in the full range flat/live response thing. And ironically, that particular speaker, those are designed to be able to be used in a traditional cabinet. So in a perfect world, right, we would love to be able to use our existing form factor cabinets in a way that is intelligent. So here's the interesting thing, and I'm going to answer this I have a relationship with Celestion, so let me just say that to begin with. But let me also answer this in a couple different frameworks. There are a number of great solutions out there. I have yet to use the Friedman, and there's actually one on Craigslist. And in a minute, I'm going to come back to all the places that you want to look, and I will come back to eBay, which I haven't mentioned yet, and the bad experience I had there, and why Reverb is far preferable generally than eBay. And by the way, a number of the things that I've been looking at on Reverb, they're also listed on eBay, but you have a much better buyer experience on Reverb. We'll come back to that. So the idea is, what experience are you looking for from that? As a guitar player, I enjoy the experience of having my cabinet behind me, projecting that sound forward, right? Much of the full range flat response is designed to be some sort of monitor. So it's this strange form factor where it's kind of like your studio monitors, where, for example, I've been doing all these demos around the Celestion Speaker Mix Pro demo, which, by the way, is amazing. But your monitoring is on your studio monitors. So the thing is that I've spent enough time hearing the speaker close mic'd in an IR, in a 412, in a 212, that yes, it will change some, but ultimately you're amplifying through the speaker, which you're close micing, the sound. So the idea of then reproducing that, what sort of box you put that system into. And here's the bigger point, and I'm gonna answer this. I have not played the Friedman, but I will say that 5 years from now, I think we're going to see one of two very markedly different things. And I will hedge my bet that it's going to be more towards the traditional guitar form factor, but I could be wrong. I should say cabinet form factor. Yes, your average IR is a speaker placed in a particular cabinet, but they're almost always close mic'd, right? So that is to say, a close mic'd, and we'll leave it to close back here for a moment. A close mic'd 212 cabinet and a close mic'd 412 cabinet don't sound that different when you're right up on the dust gap. Sorry. Reality. There are subtle differences, but would you, in a live setting, if you pulled one up in your ears or on whatever system you're using, would you be able to tell the difference and know which one is which? You might be able to tell they're different, but would you be able to go, oh, that's a 412, that's a 212? I would bet that if you pulled up, some models and went back and forth, right, there's a difference. This is one of the great things about the era that we're living in, right? There's a difference. I can probably hear the difference. Which one do I like better? And in the framework of a mix, is anybody going to notice or anybody going to care? Am I going to? Now, Joe Satriani has got dog ears. He hears things like normal human beings don't hear. But for most of us, like, mere mortals, we respond to the pinch test. There are things that we just don't, in the framework of a mix, they're not going to make that much of a difference. Now, long introduction there, that is to say, is that I don't like the form factor of a traditional wedge. I think they sound bad for guitar. After all the blab I just gave you, I think the traditional form factor of the cabinets that we like, placing a full range flat response speaker in a cabinet that is the sort of cabinet that we like, that will behave in a guitar speaker cabinet function. And if those speakers are designed, and this is what Celestine is doing, by the way, in a way that they respond in a way that is organic and has that live response, what it means is you can take your favorite 412 cabinet and just put those speakers in there, and now you're going to run some sort of power amp and do that. And that solution, I think, 5 years from now is going to be the more common one. But I am fully prepared to be wrong. I just know that in all my experiences, with the exception of one club in London, opening up for Gilby Clarke, pretty much every stage monitor I've ever had to use, when they're like, hey, can you turn your amp down? We'll turn you up on the monitor. I was like, it sounds like posterior. It doesn't behave like a guitar cabinet. Like, you're still putting a speaker in a cabinet, and that is going to influence the way the sound projects out of that cabinet. That's different than the sound of the cabinet, but the way it projects. And then, with your average, wedge, there's all this other stuff like a cone, a tweeter, and all this other stuff that has nothing to do with guitar. Now, with a Friedman thing, these are, different types of things. So let me be really clear. I'm not having played that and having seen the one on Craigslist, I'm like, must try, must demo. The other thing is, it's in the other room. These DPA microphones are here. There is 4011, 2011. The interesting thing that happened as I was micing up the AC30, I had something, and this is relevant to this point. I had something happen with a microphone that I've never had happen. And these are, first of all, as I've said before, I am an expensive friend to have around. But the amazing thing is I was like, all right, normal speaker, edge of the dust cap, points the mic straight on. So I kind of started off there. And I'm like, it could be brighter. I've never had that, like, unless I'm kind of purposely like way off the edge of the speaker paper. So I literally took it and just pointed it towards the center of the dust cap. And I'm like, it sounds like the speaker. Now, this is relevant because given all the things that I may or may not be demoing coming up in the next couple of months, being able to accurately capture the sound of a full range flat response enclosure is actually really hard because basically taking a sound of a speaker in a cabinet with a microphone turned into an IR and then played through a speaker that you're miking up. That microphone has to be totally flat. And your average microphone, the reason you're putting it on the edge of the dust cap is because of the voicing of your guitar, high SPL capable microphone. You generally have to put it towards the edge of the dust cap, let's just say it with a 57. And that's how you kind of deal with the way that microphone hears things with the DPA. And this is like an upwards of $500 microphone. I was like, this is a great sounding mic that I can point right at the center. Now the other thing is if you're looking for the best, in my opinion, all around best sounding, stick it on anything, the Roswell Pro Audio Mini K47 is kind of like the kind of like, you can't go wrong with it. $250-ish. I've gotten the price. I've got a bunch of them. They are kind of like my go-to mics because you just stick them anywhere and they just sound great. You got to find the right spot. That's a matter of like generally right around the edge of the dust cap and making sure the proximity generally about an inch, somewhere between an inch and 2 inches away from the grill. But that's kind of generally where to start. And that balance, which is going to be a different stream in different videos. But the point being is the ability to capture the sound of an FR experience accurately. I was literally just kind of going this morning. I think I'm going to end up buying one of those DPAs or maybe two of them, such that I can capture it in stereo. But what's great about that is that if you think about a speaker, the sound that's coming out of the center of the dust cap is actually the sound of the speaker. So being able to actually have a microphone that you can actually point there and accurately capture that sound is the money. So that's what I discovered about this DPA, and I'm like, oh, because in doing miking up these FR cabinets, if there's just one speaker there, for example, like the power cab behind me, there's actually 3 other power cabs here in the house. You want to be able to present that to people. There's a direct out, but that's different than actually being able to mic up that thing and attempting to accurately capture the vibe of it in the room. And that was the amazing thing about that amp. Is it was like, I've never had, for a $500 and up microphone, you're still not necessarily going to get there because most of the time a microphone has its own character and does its vibe. And part of what the vibe is, it's got a sound. It's kind of why you put a certain type of, PAF pickup in your Les Paul. All right. It may not be the most accurate, this and that. I was going to say Fishman, because the Fishman pickups have this clarity to them. But sometimes you're not looking for that total clarity. Sometimes I just want that vintage thing, Point being, I'm very excited to try the Friedman thing, honestly. I'm excited to try all of them because basically I want to know all that gear kind of inside and out. And I'm excited about the Line 6 stuff. What's great about it, so again, not having done the Friedman, I can't tell you anything about it. I can tell you I've spent a lot of time with the Line 6 stuff, and generally they tried to build an enclosure that responded like a guitar speaker cabinet, but it's also got like the twin reverb and the pro reverb, and where you've got these little kickstands so you can lean it back, and if you do want to use it as a wedge, you can lean it back towards you. And the thing is, I use 2 power cabs and I lean them back like that. What's neat is you're able to get your stereo field. Yes, you are kind of recreating this thing, but in this moment, most of the experience is not a traditional backline loaded with full range flat or full range live response. Speakers behaving kind of in that old school way. We're doing this type of thing in a live environment. So the shape of the cabinet, Dave Friedman is a genius and has built up one heck of a business because he's really, he's not good at what he does. He's great at what he does. So my guess is that sounds great. The other part of this, and it goes to, it's worth saying, I'll just say this, and this is where the research comes in, and I'm saying I don't know. What is Dave Friedman known for? Racks, tube amps. Dave does not make a single modeling product. Just saying. Line 6. AX8. Pod. Amp Farm. HD500, XT Live, X3 Live, Helix. That's a universe that they're swimming in their own pool. Just saying. The other thing is that when you look at the Friedman amplifiers, and again, let me be really clear, I'm not painting Dave with a brush. I'm just saying look at the work of the manufacturer. Most of his stuff is in the high gain Marshall end of stuff, right? That's kind of his vibe. And he does it extremely well. Look at his success. But what happens when you go to put an AC30 sound in there? What happens when you go to put a deluxe reverb sound in there? Those are questions, because ideally, when you think about the cabinets that I would use for a traditional Marshall sound, that's a very different cabinet than I would use for an AC30. A smart manufacturer, which Dave obviously is, accounts for that. But until I've actually tried those different sounds through there, I actually don't know what that AC30 sound behaves like through that wedge. That if I'm Dave, which I'm not, the first thing I'm thinking is like, how does I'm thinking of the name of the HBE mod in the BE100, HBE BE100. How does that amp sound through that thing when you're using the Universal Audio plugin, which is designed by Brainworks, that has a whole signal chain element in there of speaker, cabinet, mic pre, EQ, Neve console, VXS72. I know a lot about those plugins. I actually did the Friedman plugin demo for Universal Audio, so I actually know that world really closely. But if you look where his head is, that he's not necessarily in the AC30 or the. I'm sorry to rabbit trail, but honestly, as we're all kind of stepping into this, let me back up a step. The last Celestian video that I did, which is up on my YouTube channel, I used a plugin called Gig Performer. It's actually an app, and it enables you to run all your favorite studio effects without a DAW on your laptop, wherever it is. And the great thing about using a UA audio interface, because you got to get into the computer, is first of all, the signal quality is super high, but you're also able to use some of the processing from that interface, because the great thing about the UA stuff is like their interface also is basically got Sharp chip or two of them in there. And so the idea of being able to offload some of the processing, because at a certain point you run out of processing power, no matter what you do. And the point being of being able to load balance that in the computer. So I've spent a lot of time as of late kind of going, what does 5 years from now look like? And in having done that video, first of all, Tom, I got another plugin for you. The Lexicon 224. Unreal. Like, I think it may be my favorite reverb of all time. And that used to be the EMT 140, which was the one of the plate that was at the plant. But the Lexicon 224 it's just unreal. So I put up a clip on my personal Facebook page earlier this week. That's me kind of doing the Stevie Ray thing. It's a combination of a DBX 160 compressor, again, Universal Audio, the Brainworks Bass Dude amp model, which is basically a Bassman, and like a 62 or 63 white Bassman, and then the Lexicon 224 reverb. And as I'm listening to those sounds and going, okay, I am attempting to morph my inner Stevie Ray Vaughan, I'm going, I know those sounds from the Stevie records. And you kind of go, those bookends are a huge part of the sounds that we've gotten used to. Because if you think about, bring Stevie into the studio, we need to compress the guitar. Well, we're going to do that most likely on input going into the console. And that 160 compressor, I'm just like, and it's just kind of making things just a little tighter, but I was like, there's the sound. And then I added the 224, and I'd always figured, it's just Stevie's reverbs. And I'm listening to the 224, I'm like, no. And I say that because I was on the treadmill, and you guys might have heard the story. I've got a 1964 Vibraphone, one of 500 made. I started to say it's the greatest clean amp of all time. I won't go that far, but I'll say it's close. Um, and I remember being on the treadmill thinking, how much of that is Stevie and how much of it is the amp? I come home. I've never seen it before, and I've never been on there afterwards. The gear page has this classified section. It's good for me to stay away from that. And somehow I end up there accidentally, and there's this guy selling a 64 Vibroverb. And he's got this thing that he recorded on his iPhone. I'm like, there's the sound. Buy. I was just like, I must own this. And you begin to realize that the sonic signature of that gear, again, like that cabinet will have a sonic signature. It's not just some totally flat. FR, when you stick a speaker inside a box and there's a resonant frequency inside that box, you ever been in front of a Marshall cabinet? You know that note? That's a note. That's a resonant frequency. I think that's a D, but and I'm not saying that that's the resonant frequency inside the Marshall cabinet, but you start palm muting, you'll hear their resonant frequencies. By the way, Doug's recording tip, GTR show, guitar, tech, and recording, one of the things you can do is pull up like a 7-band EQ. And I do this, by the way, if you work with voice at all and you're kind of trying to work on the voice here, and I've just got a mic that I just set up kind of casually. This room is actually treated reasonably well. That's one of the things I'm going to talk about. But there's, it's actually much better now. There was a resonant frequency, and so what you do is you basically set up a 7-band EQ, and then you basically poke a frequency up, you make it as narrow a Q as you possibly can, and you sweep, and you find where there are certain frequencies that you're like, oh, there's the nastiness, and then you just cut that a little bit. But the point being is that anytime you stick a speaker in a box, there's just going to be some resonant stuff that happens in there that ultimately will make its way outside of the box. Again, that Marshall 412 thing that starts to happen. In any case, Nathan, what's going on? Okay, so I rabbit trailed there, but because so many of us, and I'm coming back to this thing, 5 years from now, with what Gig Performer enabled me to do sonically, I'm like, I've never gotten closer to the Stevie Ray thing than I did just using a bunch of plugins, and I was like, that I wouldn't have expected. And I know there'll be a bunch of naysayers. I can't do that. Need a real amp. And I'm like, but yeah, all right. So I tell you what, I'll do a track, I'll A/B them, and you tell me which one is which and which gear I'm using. Just like, I just don't buy it. I think people, what we want to believe. But the reality, I was like, oh, those studio processors. I saw Stevie Ray. I saw him basically in a little tiny club about as far away as that microphone is. Stage was right here. And I was like, holy cow. So I've witnessed that thing live, seen him in a big venue. But the thing is, you also begin to realize they make records the way they make records. DBX 160 compressor is a vital part of that, of getting a great sound. I digress, but it's a part of it. Nathan, great to see you, my friend. Hi, Doug. Speaking of speakers and cabinets, could you please share some wisdom about desktop monitor speakers for amp monitors? Oh, my word. My Mackie CR3 sound too boomy in my bedroom. Okay, that is a great question. Okay, I took him downstairs. Oh boy, yeah. Okay, so the Gear Tech, Guitar Tech and Recording Show, absolutely, because again, gear is really important. First of all, one of the great things about having gear show up for review is sometimes you get a chance to review stuff that you wouldn't necessarily buy, and then you end up going like, I'm all in. So how do I say this? I'm just going to say this. When we think of the most iconic brands that are in the marketplace, and then we think about the brands that are kind of in the middle point, traditionally PreSonus is a brand that has been, people think more about the middle point. They're not bottom feeders. Did I say Behringer? That was so naughty. Behringer makes some great products, but basically they rip everybody off. That's been their game. They steal designs, they steal code, and then they make it their own. It's just true. And their cheap stuff is really cheap. It breaks. The PreSonus stuff is made, for people that want to have great sound at a reasonable price. So the idea is that I had some PreSonus studio monitors that came in, the Aris E8s, I think is the model. And I was like, okay, I'll plug them in. And I was like, wow, they sound great for guitar. I'm not a fan of JBL studio monitors. They sound great for vocals. Everything they make great about vocals, in my opinion, makes them terrible for guitars. Like, in any time you've ever been in a situation, and I'm really aware of this, like where there are JBL monitors, everything that makes them great for vocals makes them terrible for guitar. They accentuate every frequency that I don't want. And it's just kind of like, oh. And it's this stuff up here, excuse me, that vocalists love, such that when the band's playing away, the vocalist can hear themselves. It's a really important thing. But for guitar players, it's like, that's not the way my guitar sounds, and I hate it. So the Aris E8s, I'm like, this sounds like my guitar. I have a second set that up here that came in for review that's kind of the E8 Plus. It's kind of their improved version. There are probably a couple of reasons why you're not digging what you're digging. Boomy in my bedroom. So this is a classic example. When I get to showing kind of what I did in this room, this was a bedroom. I just kind of took it over. I've had a studio in here for a long time before I actually kind of did over the gear garage, which was actually a garage. This was a recording space. And I had to treat this space since I kind of went back up in here. I had to set up a whole video and audio studio in here. Second set of Aris here. But there are a couple of things about setting up studio monitors, especially in a home or / apartment setting. One, you're probably in a corner. Two, you're probably not using any type of isolator. And three, unlike the PreSonuses, there's a probability your Mackies don't have some sort of filter to accommodate for the bass buildup that happens when your studio monitors are right near a wall. Bass is a very strange thing. If you think about the directionality of a guitar speaker cabinet, you get off axis, you get on axis, night and day. Bass is a very non-directional entity. It's very strange, unlike treble, which has a tendency to be very firing line. The thing is, when you put a studio monitor against a wall or in a corner, all of a sudden it excites the room around certain frequencies and it hypes those frequencies. My guess is if you took one of those monitors and kind of brought it out into the center of the room and panned everything all the way over to that side and left the other one where it is and then panned it back over to that side, you'd probably find that where you're placing your speaker, against a wall, in a corner, all of that stuff is responsible for 90% of the drama you're experiencing. So all my studio stuff and a bunch of my amps, I didn't bring them up, but you'll be seeing them here, use isoacoustics. They make amp isolators, and they also make speaker isolators, and they're the best. Like pretty much every major studio, if they've got kind of, the speakers there, you're going to see the isoacoustic stuff. Every one of the main demo guys, they're great. They're the best. The Orlex stuff is a foam pad, which has its own acoustic thing, versus the isoacoustic stands. They're designed to eliminate electrical energy transferring up into the speaker from its surface when it gets excited, and it's also designed to isolate the speaker from exciting downward the surface that it has. Stage 1 board. Thank you very much, Melissa. You are awesome. This is the isoacoustic Stage 1 board, and these are basically amp isolators, and this is the board. I actually did a demo for this. It was funny. Dave, the owner of the company, and I are Melissa is on it. I don't really want to throw the Orlex folks under the bus, because this is a product I used for a long time because the isoacoustic stuff hadn't come out yet. Way better than nothing. The last thing you want to do, and the reason these have been so successful, is that your speaker as it sits on a hard surface, if you stick your guitar headstock up against a sheetrock wall, you'll hear that wall, quote unquote, go electric. The same thing is true, that excitement of energy being transferred from one surface to the other. Guaranteed to remove that transfer. The problem is there are some inadequacies around this particular material. Way better than nothing. And I will say, because I do want to throw my friends at Orlex some duly deserved love, they basically, the Gear Garage, they outfitted that entire room. While I don't use their speaker isolators, in terms of treating your room, they've done a phenomenal job with their free design and map and all of that. As a matter of fact, you can't see it, but I've actually got up in the room that's helping it's basically like a mic stand, and then you can mount these kind of acoustic dealios on it. I used to know the name of that, but that is kind of standing there, and that definitely reduces some of the standing waves. So the reality is that isolating your speakers from the surface on which they sit will do a lot to prevent that hyper excitement around the reflection, and it also affects the accuracy of the speaker, because once it starts, I'm not going to go any further than that. Other than the fact is, like, once you start this excitement relationship, the speaker and the cabinet it's in can no longer operate at optimal efficiency, because they're being impacted by reflections that are no longer phase time aligned with what the speaker is doing. And you get what Dave Morrison would call smear. And Dave is a genius. And where he got his start was he worked for the CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Company. And basically they had a TV studio, and they had trolleys that would go by outside. And his job, I think he isolated the whole building such that it wouldn't respond to the vibration of the trolleys. And he just kind of did this, and he's basically in pretty much every major studio in the world because he's a genius. And this is his guitar amp product. And the funny thing is, I did a demo for this because there's certain things that are hard to reproduce sonically. But Premier Guitar did a thing last year around new products, and this had come out, and I demoed for Dave a couple of times, including out at Sweetwater. But I basically went over to his booth last NAMM and put some of my playing onto a looper so we could A/B an amp isolated and one that wasn't isolated, and you can blatantly hear the difference. So what we did was in this thing with Premier Guitar, because I was like, there's certain instances where you go into as a gear demonstrator, you gotta go, if the haters are going to come out, this is the opportunity they might actually come out in. But we presented this board, and the audience at Premier Guitar was overwhelmingly positive. And they're like, yeah, we totally get it, and you remind people about what it's like to be on a stage and have your gear start vibrating. So that is to say, that's a great question. My guess, Nithin, is that, again, if you pull one of those speakers out in the middle of the room, you're going to find night and day. And anybody that's watching this. So the other thing that I did in this room, and I'm kind of figuring it out, is that the way sound likes to reflect, if you put it in a parallel relationship, it has to bounce up and down, and this way. So most of us live in square/rectangular spaces. What I purposely did in this room is I have the sound desk. It's a rectangular room. You'll end up seeing it sooner than later, but I've got it at an angle for a couple of reasons. One, that reduces the parallel standing wave. So that is to say, not only is your desk probably right up against a wall, which is bad, and not only is it potentially right up in a corner, which is even worse, but it's also parallel with that wall. If you have the ability to kind of swing something out, you're now bouncing sound instead of in a straight line at a parallel surface where it bounces back and forth and creates what are called standing waves. Now you're offsetting that, and you're kind of fighting the natural rectangularity of the room, and that's what I've done here, but with a couple of added benefits. If I were using the built-in camera that's over there, I'm looking basically at a 90-degree angle, 45-degree. What I've done is the sweet spot of my studio desk there, where I mix sound here, I've got an old style desk called a jerker that was available from IKEA, it's got these swivel stands that come off the main frame, which of course have isoacoustic isolators on them. I've got them centered at the sweet spot at the mixing desk, but I can swing them out, and where I'm sitting right here is also in that sweet spot. And so coincidentally, I've got that just kind of positioned in such a way that, again, it's not in a parallel relationship with the wall, and it's not right up in a corner. It's a great question. Oh, good. Okay. All right. Let's see here. Let's see here. Shirts for sale. Yes. Thank you, Chris Alexander. Bruce, Chick-fil-A started here in Georgia. All right. Awesome. By the way, if there are any more questions, go ahead and add some question marks. Okay. All right. There we go. Let's see. Okay. That's funny. All right. Hello, Ben. Paul, what's going on? So I've got a comment here from my dear friend Paul Shedden. And so let me just say, for all the public and all the world to hear, we're going to be spending some time with my dear friends from Mission. I've got a ton of their stuff, and they make FR solutions. I've not yet played through their FR solution, but they're going to be doing a presentation, and we're going to probably have some other follow-up stuff around control. And they make more products, and they're used by more guitar players for expression pedals and the little T2 foot switch. They just have amazing products. They're great people. They're here in the San Francisco Bay Area, and Paul is here. Hello, Paul. Great to see you. Okay. I wonder if there's... Oh, that's kind of a convenient thing about having a little laptop here, is that this thing's not going to go spouting sound downstream. Let's see here. Okay, good. Good. Okay, good. First of all, if anybody has any further questions, there is the spreadsheet, but also I can kind of fly like this as well, since I have officially stolen Melissa's laptop, probably much to her chagrin. Boy, this is kind of convenient. I can get used to this. All right, that is the official one. Let me go over to the other account here. But if you guys got more questions, because this is one of my favorite subjects. Aww. I love Facebook, by the way. Let's go here. And, I'm on Melissa's account. Got it. All right. Give me a moment. /Doug Doppler personal. Let's see if we got anybody over there asking some questions. All right. Oh, look at this. Thanks for sharing, Tony. Appreciate it. Good. Yeah. Okay. So let's take a look here. Tom Atkins hated JBL since first band practice at 16. So now I sing, so it's laugh out loud. No, I totally hilarious. Emotional purchase of the Lexicon 224, laugh out loud. I love that. All right, Sonia, how you doing? Great to see you. But be careful. If the speaker is sitting on too soft foam, it will not operate optimally either. If you push air, there needs to be enough support to the cabinet so it doesn't move in the opposite direction. Absolutely correct. Reflexive and responsive. So put your speakers on some foam you happen to have lying around. So, and this is the thing, is that the speaker, a minute ago I made this reference to phase time alignment. Phase alignment, time alignment. I kind of crossed my metaphors there. The time alignment, if the speaker fires and then that frequency reverberates down into a surface that it's connected with, and that vibration makes it way back up into the speaker, that's a big part of where the smear comes, because it's already done with that frequency. It's moving on to the next bit of signal that you're sending it, but now it's responding to that same frequency it was pushed out a minute ago, coming back up into there. So it's a thing. Hello, Rick. Great to see you. All right. Good. All right. Oh, look at this. All right. Next week, we'll make sure you have your own laptop. I will do that. Well, the other thing that's great about, and this is kind of the fun part. Hey, Bruce, what's going on, my man? the new look, it looks great. Melissa did just such a great job. It's been a crazy week. All right, Brad. Good thing I had left earpiece and not the right one. There's a joke in there that I missed. There's always a danger in going backwards through the feed because sometimes you get to the punchline before the joke. All right. Well, first of all, if anybody has any more questions, that would be great. I normally have a 1040 lesson, um, but they were busy with other stuff. So I've got a couple more minutes here. But otherwise, 64 AC30 surgery. Sounds like when you're getting getting up there in age. That's great. Okay. So I have a couple more things. Yes. First of all, thank you for hanging out. This has been cool. So most of the people that hang out here. Oh, there we go. How would you test an amp in a parking lot? That's Melissa Doppler. That's a great question. Um, it's a funny thing. And I was going to go into how do you know which gear to buy, which beer to buy. Um, I buy gear because I know generally I'm going to use it for some sort of demo purposes. That's kind of my thing. I'm going to need it because I'm going to do this particular thing with it. So there's a reason I'm buying it. The biggest mistake people make when they buy gear is they quite often buy some piece of gear that has very little to do with their existing rig or a rig that they're in the process of building and have mapped out. And I say that because I look on Craigslist once or twice a day because I'm always kind of casually looking for something that is of interest that I can use for my business. And I'm always amazed at the junk people have bought that very clearly it's just like, here's the thing. There is no shame in being an intermediate guitar player and having quote unquote intermediate quality gear. That's one of the reasons I threw, major props out for the Indonesian made Squire stuff. It is phenomenal. Just for the money, it's probably the best money you can spend in the market because you get classic designs. Unlike the Epiphone part of the equation, it looks just like a Strat from afar. And, they benefit from everything that Leo did. And then you benefit from Indonesian manufacturing on that kind of second tier thing. It's just like, it's awesome. As a gear demonstrator, I've reached out to my friends and vendors like, what do I have to do to get more of the Squire stuff in? So the idea is like building a rig. That's an important thing. It's something that we're going to be covering more over the course of this next year. And the other part of this is that I'm going to be making this 10 most iconic effects. And I can roughly go down the list. And I would love it if actually people would like to fill in their version of this because I know what my version is more or less, but I'd love to know what everybody else is. And off the top of my head, there is the early wah-wah. Right now, the one I'm going to probably use is the Clyde picture. But I also have, there are a number of photos of Hendrix using the Italian Gen-made wah with the little white boot around the bottom. It's got a little cute little white booty. Boot, not, forget it. Then, of course, got to have a Univine. And so I will actually rabbit trail again on the purchasing side of this. These guys, $2,500 to $4,500. I paid $2,000. I found the one that had all the things that I wanted. It was in good enough condition that I was happy. It's not totally pristine. There are a couple little marks here. The thing that you look for, there was one that I was looking at, had some rust on it. I'm like, if it's rust on the outside, there's got to be crud on the inside. Most of these, including this one, had photos of the inside, so you saw all the different surfaces. And there's like 5 or 6 of them on Reverb, and I'm like, you know what? These folks are sitting on these. If and most of them bought them for $1,200-$1,500, a decade ago. So I was like, you know what? I know what I want to pay. They were asking $2,500. They reduced it, I think, from like $3,250. And I was like, will you take two? They were like, yeah. And, showed up yesterday. I have not had a chance to plug it in yet, but the point being is like I knew what I wanted to pay for it. It was emotional, actually very emotional. But I was like, I've got time on this. So, Crybaby, Univibe, Fuzzface, um, Echoplex, right? Electric Ladyland, right? The Big Muff. Now, the Foxy Lady, Josh at JHS has one. The Foxy Lady, as I understand, was a pedal that Mike Matthews built for Guild that basically is a Big Muff, and supposedly Jimmy played through that on something. All right, there's 5. Hopefully I can remember which 5 those are. Gotta have a Tube Screamer in there. I'm just making sure I get my list right. And then we start getting to some of the other subsets where it starts to get, okay, what are some of the other pedals that we want to make sure that we get in there that we don't miss? And probably the CE1 Chorus from Boss, right? That's a super iconic pedal. You've got to have, I'm pretty sure the MXR Dynacomp is going to be there. When you think about the Distortion Plus, a bazillion people had it, but honestly, not necessarily a super great sounding distortion, right? Just saying. DS1's got to be in there, original DS1. I actually have to send mine back to Analog Mike. That's all over Surfing with the Alien. By the way, Always With You, Always With Me is a DS1 into a, wait for it, JC120. Kid you not. Then probably the Deluxe Memory Man. And then kind of a subset of that is maybe the DM2 analog delay. But probably the Memory Man above the DM2. But, and you could add a couple more. But the idea is why I'm doing that. First of all, it's a great YouTube video. It's a great video to potentially build my little baby channel. But it also means that if you've never played through a Univibe, which I actually never have, this is what it sounds like, which means in whatever modeler you go for, if you like the sound that I came up with, and presuming this is there's what's called part drift, a lot of the old pedals, they just kind of like, I need this value, and they just went out and got it. Now, generally speaking, stuff sounded good. There was less cheap poop on the market. So, but the Gen Was, they were just throwing whatever they could get component-wise in there. And so the idea is that you have one of the best sounding ones. Again, just because it's an old Strat doesn't mean it's a great sounding guitar. But the idea is that with the part, presuming you got a good one, and then with part drift, over time, it probably in the period of time I own this thing, there are parts that will probably fail or be in the process of failing. That means that I'm going to have to find NOS, new old stock, replacements for them, send it off to Analog Mike, who is my guy for doing this. Also, iconic tone. Kenny Wayne Shepherd was mentioning there was a Experience Hendrix tour, with the exception of Satriani. Every guitar player on that tour had a King of Tone. So, like, do I actually factor in the King of Tone? Iconic in theory really means looking back at past ones, but that pedal has got legs of its own. Getting back to this thing, documenting it such that people have a reference point of going, here is not only an AC30, an old AC30, or a Univibe, but here's a really good one, great sounding amp. And here it is well documented, such that you may never play through a 64 AC30 or a vintage Univibe, but here's a good documentation of that sound. And as you're in your Axe effects, as you're in your Helix, as you're in a Kemper, as you're in all these things where, as you're in your Quad Cortex, you're now able to experience the vibe of those pieces of gear accurately as a sound sample, also having in mind some of the key albums that they were used on. And in turn, as you sit there and pull up that model, you actually know what that is because that's what it is. And the interesting thing about, as I began to make this list, I was like, wow, 4 or 5 of these things are blatantly right out of Hendrix's rig. I'm like, template. Like seriously, like nobody has had a bigger impact on the template pieces of tone. So the idea is that getting back to buying a piece of gear or building a signal chain in your Helix or whatever it is, the idea is like I'm recreating or I'm creating a very specific rig that is style driven. And the comment, did I tell my eBay story? I did not tell my eBay story, and I will be telling that in a moment. Thank you, Melissa. You are awesome. The idea of having that right piece of gear in your mind, you kind of go, all right, I'm going to dial this in. The other thing I'm going to do is having this. I'm going to be in this year. I'm going to be making and selling a bunch of presets, which actually means if you can kind of go back to the Univibe thing, video, and it's like, all right, now I've dialed that in, and here it means that you have the benefit of the experience that I had. I'm making an investment for us because I'm as passionate about taking other people on their journey as I am about my own, because it's way more fun. There's nothing like hearing, these guys like Chris and Joran saying, Doug, I bought these pieces of gear because Doug demoed them. They saw what the gear spoke to me, and now it has the opportunity to do that for them. That's a times two dividend. It's not just one to one person. I can literally look at two people who went, hey, I benefited from that. That is such a great feeling, So I'm doubling down. So the other thing is the 10 most iconic amplifiers. So let's see. I'm going to go through the list here, and again, people are welcome to add their stuff here. Oh, thanks for the thumbs up. You guys are awesome. Headstock Harem, what's going on? Sweetwater's great. I've had 2 guitars plecked by them. There you go. All right. Excellent. All right. I obviously have missed some chats. I'm going to come back to your question in a moment, Chris. Thank you. 10 most iconic amps. Okay. 1, why would I do that? And so on. I think it's really important. I don't think anybody has put together the 10 amps in a room such that you can kind of go, there's the vibe, capture it accurately. And honestly, in this moment, I'm probably going to need to not only buy the 1 DPA, but buy 2, A for the stereo stuff with the FR, but it just, sometimes, it's the A being back and forth. That's a different conversation. But the point being is being able to capture those amps really as they sound in the room is really the thing. AC30. Vibroverb. That is, when I saw Stevie Ray, was using a Vibroverb and a Super Reverb together. And I'm pretty sure that version of his rig also included the MXR, their little AB box, little black thing. And it's an ABY box is basically what it is. Actually, it's an AB or ABY depending on how you've got it set up. And I think he was running 2 different rigs, one into the Vibroverb for just the beautiful clean, and the other where he was pulverizing the Super Reverb with the Tube Screamer. So the Vibroverb, it's like when you hear that sound, you're like, that's the Stevie Ray clean. It's different than the Super Reverb, which is also one of my other favorite amps. All right, so the Vibroverb's got to be on there. Plexi Marshall's got to be on there. Then the AC30's got to be on there. The Deluxe Reverb is kind of cemented into history because so many people have used it and so many people know it. Eric Johnson has used them on and off, and it's such a great pedal platform. Mason's got a 64 Deluxe. I've got one that's a more recent one. I'm going to probably borrow Mason's. Probably the first, the JMP Master Volume or whatever the heck that is, 2204, I believe. That first Master Volume Marshall's got to kind of be in there just because that was the first Master Volume Marshall. That was just such an iconic amplifier. I'm trying to decide about the Dumble stuff. I can borrow some of it, but the reality is that there's a finite group of people that used it. There's a finite group of people that are ever actually going to be able to play them. But yet, Stevie Ray in the Steel String Singer, Eric Johnson, Steel String Singer, Kirk Hammett's got a Steel String Singer, Henry Kaiser has had kind of all the different flavors, all the amps that Kenny Wayne Shepherd plays now are Dumble has gone through them. And honestly, as I say this, I'm just basically convincing myself there's probably been no other amp guru that has had that much folklore, mystery, and my buddy Rick, whose last name I won't say, is friends with him, and and he's just like, John Mayer. Sorry, I left out John Mayer. So probably a steel string singer or an overdrive special. This should be easier because I've been doing this for days now. I've got the Marshalls, got the AC30. All right, the JC120 because it's iconic. Enter Sandman. It's all over the Metallica stuff. Adrian Belew. In case you didn't know, it's got the CE1 chorus in it. It's got to be in there. Just an amazing amplifier. The Mesa Boogie Mark One has to be in there. There's one other amp before I get to the last amp, and then I get a chance to tell my eBay story. And I'll forget. In any case, Melissa's down there. Let me just take a quick gander over here. Tom, I love you guys. Outstanding for metal. Hang on a second. Let me pop this open here. There we go. All right. Yes. Boy, it's really nice having a laptop down here to do this. I'm loving this. There we go. Good. And let's take a look over here. There we go. Shane, what's going on, my friend? Joshua? Hey, I'm hooked on here now. I think we're all gearheads. Absolutely. How about making a special video about top 10 amps with demoing each? You are attuned, Sonia. How about yes? So yes, 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 and yes. And the other thing is that there we go. Melissa Doppler, Booty versus Boutte. So the thing is, oh, there we go. Yeah, the eBay story. So, Captain Scarlet, hey, Gear Whisperer, if you have the same pedals, oh, this is a great point. All right, hey, Gear Whisperer, and then I'm going to get to the eBay story because this is where I almost got burned. And it's also another amp that needed to be on the list. Hey, Whisperer, if I have the same pedals as everyone else, how do I sound like me? That is a great question. And this is, and I'm going to have to remember that particular point because it's so important. So I was on Pete Thorne's stream one day, his Saturday live stream, Sunday, and I was like, because there are certain players, Pete, Phil X, that most of the time you can hear somebody that learned their excellence on the instrument by learning 5 million songs. Like I hear Pete playing and I'm like, this is a guy that spent a lot of time not only learning a million songs, but learning them, pulling them apart. And it's part of why he's such a great guitar player. It's part of why Phil X is such a great guitar player. And also, if you watch Phil X do his cover thing, you're like, is there a song this guy doesn't know, can't play, or can't sing? And he has I'm relatively enthusiastic. Phil X makes me look like an old lady with a walker. And I'm neither an old lady and I don't have a walker. But the point being is that, I asked Pete, I was like, did you, as you were coming up, did you learn by playing songs or did you spend a lot of time, studying in private lessons and doing stuff out of books? And he said, songs. And I felt that because you can usually tell a lot about a player by kind of their vibe. And I have to end in approximately 2 minutes. So I'm going to go really fast. My cadence is going to pick up a whole bunch. Mode course coming. The thing is that the advantage of having the tools that the majority of the people use, like if you take a look at the Steve Vai rig and the Joe Satriani rig and the Nuno Betancourt rig, they're largely built on the Hendrix Eddie Van Halen template, but they all sound different. But sometimes having the great tools is like saying, if you look at your top chefs, they all have the same knives, they all have the same ingredients. Most of them started off making pancakes next to mom on a Saturday morning. Waffles. How do I make a pie? How do I make chicken? They start off with the same stuff, but eventually one of the things that happens is you start to find your own voice. You do something that's a little differently. And then you begin to do that. It's a great question, but sometimes what we do is we learn from the greats. We understand how they use their gear, and as we do, we begin to find our own voice. And there's two sides to that. One, it's totally okay to never find your own voice. If your thing is, I just want to play my favorite songs by my favorite artists and either sound as close to them as I can or not, knock yourself out. Your level of attainability is way more attainable to like the starry aspirations that somebody else like myself might have, which is way more difficult to reach and attain. That said, eventually one day you play that riff a little differently and you're like, oh, this is my thing. There's a fine line between repetition and style. But style is based on a series of repeated things that we do idiomatically around certain styles. And then we have our vibe. And once you can identify that, you do that. My buddy Lincoln Brewster said this about his vocals. He would just record himself over and over and eventually kind of go, that's unique. And he made a list of all the things he organically did and kind of put them together. I kind of did the same thing when I was about 24 or 25. I had a bunch of recordings and there were things that I would do as I was improvising. I was like, I'm keeping that. Because at that point, everything was kind of new and wasn't super repeated. All right, the eBay story. I love the fact that that was the slowest minute ever. One of the amps that's on the list is the Mark IIc. And I got all excited. They are hard to find. I found one on eBay. I was like, if I don't buy this, somebody's gonna nab it. I'm about to buy one today that I found, but is I'm not going to go into that story. But I was like, this super rare, hard to find. Buy it, hit buy, and then I noticed he's put the serial number inside the photos, and I'm like, okay, go out online, look at the serial number, Mark III. Doppler just got burned. I reach out to the seller right away. It's in the first, it's 5 minutes, not even in the first hour. Reach out to the seller, reach out to eBay. eBay, oh yeah, blah, blah, blah. They could care less. Basically, they're holding on to my money for 30 days. The seller never replied to my emails. They ended up, and I ended up saying, this is not it is, this is serial number. They relisted as a Mark III, and they never replied, but they basically printed a label that they never used. To get in to print the label, they would have had to see my thing saying, hey, this isn't what it is. They would have seen the message from eBay. They totally ignored it. They never replied to me. Fortunately, I'm not going to get hosed, but I'm going to get hosed for 30 days, and eBay doesn't care. So basically, the moral of the story is, and I'm going to tell you one other, one other insight, and then I need to jump here, is that the seller, and this is the classic thing of what you don't want to do, but there is some buyer protection, which is a little bit of a buffer, but most people can't afford to have their money floating out there for 30 days. I can't, but the thing is that the seller, and this is the thing about an emotional purchase, but I'm fessing up, had 0 transactions. But I wouldn't have made the purchase if they had some other stuff that they were selling. So I was like, and yes, it could have been a ruse, but I'm like, let me try and profile this person. They seem to know a lot about the amp, except for the fact that they erroneously said it was a Mark III, and it was, or Mark IIc plus. But they also had some other stuff that they were selling that I could tell was the quote unquote, it looked like they're listening. So I'm like, you know what? Said they've been a member since 2017, and so they joined, and I can actually see that I think they're selling stuff. I'm in. I'll get the money back, but eBay could care less. So like, pretty much I will do is everything humanly possible to never buy anything on eBay again. Reverb, yeah, my heart. Now that said, I also did buy a vintage, and you'll see it sooner than later, a pinstripe Marshall 412 cabinet. That I did buy from eBay. But the seller had 20,000 transactions with 100% satisfaction rating. There's a certain amount of confidence, and I got on the phone with them. They were very clear about what it was and what it wasn't. And usually when somebody actually says, here are the pros, here are the cons, Lots of photos, lots of details. That's it. Now, the last thing I'm going to say, and I'm now 2 minutes late for my lesson. There are some sites out there. Bygone Tones is where I was able to date the date codes and the various things on the Celestine speakers that are in that cabinet. In particular, what I wanted was some vintage Celestine speakers that were the pulsonic cones with the 55 hertz bass response. So basically, those were the speakers that Hendrix and Clapton, those are the ones they wanted. The speakers may or may not be original to the cabinet, but they are era appropriate to 1967, per the date codes and all of that stuff. That cabinet sounds unreal. So the idea is all this stuff, I'm going to be profiling it, and those are going to be available for people. But the thing is that I recently heard a Mark II-C profile that sounded so bad, I was absolutely in shock. And so just because it's a great piece of gear doesn't mean the person knew how to dial it into profile. And I was just like, how to make a great sounding piece of gear sound terrible. So the goal here with all of this is, one, is to provide some edutainment, because I think there's a lot of value there to be had. And number two, give people the opportunity to own those sounds, not so I can enrich myself, but there is a business side of it, which is me being smart. But the other side is like, imagine being able to have a great version of an AC30 dialed into that sweet spot. Because again, the thing that I mentioned there is that once I had that thing set at the right spot, all I did was switch guitars, and the character of the guitar just came out. Here's the Telly. Here's the Gretsch. The thing that most people don't know about an AC30 is that it has one of the best Strat sounds. Unreal. Honestly, I think the Strat sounds the best into it, because you're like, oh snap. The number 4 position on a Strat, you're like, holy cow. All right, so I am actually 4 minutes late for my student, which is totally not cool. But fortunately, I have a little gap after their lesson, so I will apologize to them. I will thank you for hanging out. I hope this has been 1/10 as much fun for you as it's been for me. I thank all of you for coming, hanging out in the new space. I'm loving this space. Melissa, thank you so much. You are domestically sophisticated. And I realize that could sound kind of strange, but it is the highest form of compliment. She is a homemaker and a stylist with class. And she knows how to be a woman in a day and age where I appreciate so much of what she does on so many different levels. It's my privilege to call you my wife, and I'm getting little goosebumpies. I just want to say thank you for all you do and how much you do to make my life easier. And I love all the things that you do that are artful and stylistic and creative. And I love that you bring that and compliment that in my life. So thank you. Everybody, love you. Look forward to seeing you next Saturday. Thanks again. Cheers. Where the heck did my mouse go?